Good morning, everybody. Baroness Morris, Chairman of the World Travel Market Advisory Council, Taleb Frye, Secretary General of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, with whom we launched WTM World Responsible Tourism Day. Welcome, everybody, to World Travel Market's Responsible Tourism Day 2013. World Responsible Tourism Day is the largest day of responsible tourism action in the world. It is not only the many sessions and exhibitor involvement on the exhibition floor right here over the week, but what is taking place in the many communities around the world under the banner of WRTD. You can see many examples of participating projects on the screen behind me. Today we have a record number of exhibitors taking part in WRTD in a variety of ways around the world. For example, Hertz is using social media to show travellers how they can go green, while Fisherman's Rest in Malawi is mending broken boreholes to ensure 1,000 people have access to clean water. And Footprint Vietnam is organising a recycling bike race. Yep, that's right, which sees participants recycle while taking part in a bike race. As you are being seated, we also display the many senior industry executives, including Sir Richard Branson, who have supported the initiative over the years. These two montages demonstrate the support and involvement we have both from the grassroots and very top of our profession. Responsible tourism is the backbone of the industry. It helps us to give back to struggling communities, to conserve amazing biodiversity, stunning scenery, extraordinary heritage and teeming wildlife. It should be on the boardroom agenda of every travel company everywhere. That's why I believe WTM's Responsible Tourism Programme across the 3 days this week is so important, helping to inspire, encourage, debate and motivate, bringing a range of presentations, seminars and debates with a lineup of experts and experienced industry executives that will help us to tease out the problems, explain new thinking and probe possible solutions. We want to be completely open and frank with you. We want to present the facts directly and honestly. We aim to show you both sides of the argument. Above all, we provide the platform to facilitate positive change within the industry. Make no mistake, these sessions are not about the niceties of life, not about just patting ourselves on the back. WTM does this throughout the year on our Responsible Tourism blog and through our Spotlight features, and we have also extended the World Responsible Tourism platform to WTM Latin America in Sao Paulo earlier on this year. And we will continue with the extension of the launch of WTM Africa in Cape Town next May. WTM's ideology is best highlighted by our first session, the roundtable on travel and tourism and carbon pollution. Here we have 3 high-profile, outspoken senior executives from mass market tour operating, the hotel industry and national government discussing the key issue for the industry. Following the panel debate, we will host the World Responsible Tourism Awards. I was a judge for the first time this year. I found the experience uplifting and inspiring, discovering all the good practice taking place in the industry. Before I hand over the floor to BBC journalist Stephen Saka to kick off today's proceedings, I want to take this opportunity to highlight the UNWTO's campaign against trafficking that World Travel Market is proud to support. On your seats, you should be able to find this leaflet here. Please do take the opportunity to have a look through the information on this leaflet. The campaign aims to raise awareness among international tourists about the types of illicit goods and the services to which they are often exposed during their travels, and which directly or indirectly fund organised crime groups. Travellers can play a key role in reducing demand for these products through ethical consumer choices. The campaign will encourage tourists to make informed decisions and help reduce demand for trafficking in persons, cultural artefacts, wildlife, fauna and flora, as well as counterfeit goods and illicit drugs. Please visit the UNWTO website to see how you can help with the campaign. And now I have great pleasure in opening the 7th World Travel Market World Responsible Tourism Day in association with the UNWTO. And I'm now delighted to pass you over to BBC Hard Talk presenter Stephen Sacker to introduce the speakers for the panel debate in more detail. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Simon, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be back here for another year. I say another year because actually this is now half a dozen years that I've been involved in World Responsible Tourism Day. And it's really one of my favourite parts of World Travel Market. I'm a pretty familiar face now, I dare say, to quite a few of you. And the reason I am always delighted to be asked to come back is because I think this day is particularly important. It also reveals to me every year some fantastic stories of work being done on the ground right across the world to show that travel and tourism can, when it's done well, be done in a responsible, sustainable way. But of course, it isn't always like that. As Simon has already said, this industry faces very serious challenges. I'm sure many of you who follow the arguments will know that the latest UN IPC International Panel on Climate Change report pretty much removes any last semblance of doubt about the reality, the alarming reality of man-made climate change, global warming. The data is, of course, sometimes disputed. There are controversies about exactly what's happening at any particular time, but frankly, the trend is clear. Our planet faces warming. It will be very difficult, I think, now to stop that warming going beyond 2 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial levels, and that's the context in which this roundtable debate must take place. There are real things happening on the ground. The travel and tourism sector, which is currently responsible for about, I think, 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, has to be part of our species' response to what is happening. So that is the context for the next 45 minutes or so of debate. What I'm going to do is invite my 3 panelists to come up right now. I want you to give them all a very warm hand, and then I'm going to tell you in a little bit more detail who they are. But if Gerald Lawless, Johan Lundgren, and Martinez Van Schalkwyk would all make your way, please. Gentlemen, it's very good to see you. Martinez, why don't you go there? I'm already being bossy, you see, and I haven't even started. It's a pleasure to see all 3 of you, and just because not everybody will know exactly what you do and who you are, I'm just going to give everybody a quick thumbnail sketch of each of my panelists. I'll start at the far end with Johan. He is the Deputy Chief Executive of TUI Travel, and in that capacity, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Johan's work. Interestingly, TUI very much involved in the aviation business, as well as the much broader set of activities they do across travel and tourism. And that I mentioned because aviation is obviously going to be a part of our discussion this morning. Next to Johan, we have Gerald Lawless, who is President, Group CEO of the Jumeirah Group, obviously a huge player now in the hotel sector. And again, many of you will know that not only does Gerald have that corporate hat on, but he also happens to be Vice Chairman of the World Travel and Tourism Council, so takes an overview of the industry as well.
One of the 6 vice chairmen.
Well, don't be modest. You're still a vice chairman. That'll do for me. Doesn't mean I can't grill you in that basis. You're not getting away like that.
I know.
And then finally, our resident politician, who we can all boo and hiss at if we feel so inclined, just kidding, is Martinez Van Schalkwyk, who is the Minister of Tourism in the South African government. But interestingly, Martinez also was a former Minister of the Environment, so has been looking at some of these challenges that we've already talked about from various different political perspectives, and we might tease out what's different about being Minister of Tourism from being Minister of Environment over the course of the next few minutes. So I think you'll agree we've got a great panel, and we've got plenty of serious, if not hard, talking to do over the next few minutes. I am not going to bother starting out by asking you each whether you, in your own personal capacities, take the climate change challenge seriously, because I know you'll tell me you will. I mean, it's impossible now to be a senior figure as you all are and sort of deny that you take it seriously. But more to the point is, tell me, each of you in turn, how you've changed the way you operate and you do your business because of the perception you have of the climate change challenge. I'll start with you, Johan.
Right. Well, as you know, TUI Travel was formed in 2007 by a merger of 2 companies, and it was very clear that early on that we wanted to put this on top of the agenda. So we treated this basically as we treated a number of other things that we want to take a leadership position in. You set targets, you dedicate resources, and most importantly also then when you set the targets as well, you start tracking your results and you're measuring your key performance indicators in these areas. And this is something that we've done since the start of the company back in 2000.
Tracking your results in what way? Be specific.
Yeah, so if you're saying that, look, we want to reduce our carbon emissions with X%, and we want to set that target that is happen within, 3 to 5 years. We had a target of 6% from 2008 to 2014, as an example. Then specifically, we wanted to see how is that going to develop across the 2008, 2009, 2010, and 11. Now, we didn't hit that target in 2014. We actually hit it last year. That's an example of actually...
Maybe that's because you set yourself a very easy target. That happens.
Could have been, but that's why we also revised the targets. We upgraded it to 9% instead. So that's the thing. I mean, we had a lot of sleepless nights in the beginning in 2008. Actually, how are we actually going to get to the 6%? But as we, put in the dedication, we're looking at the fleet, we're looking at investments into winglets, we were looking at the way operational efficiencies, everything from single engine taxiing to cleaning the engines on the airplanes more often as well. And if you get that embedded in the business as usual, we start also seeing that the results came back more quicker. But the key thing is, when you set the target, you got to measure your success on it. And you got to set the target that is not going to be only about 2050 or 2030. It's going to happen within the next 3 to 5 year plan.
But are you prepared to set yourself a target that threatens your competitive advantage?
Well, here's the thing. In this situation, this increases the competitive advantage because we've been saving tens of millions of pounds by doing this. Tens of millions of pounds by doing it, because basically reducing fuel is reducing waste, is increasing the efficiency of the operation. There was never any doubt, within the first couple of years that we actually saw that this was going to have a positive impact also on the bottom line, which then makes it even more surprising why not more companies are putting more efforts behind this.
Well, I want to get to the industry-wide standard and whether the industry as a whole is frankly really doing as much as it could in a moment. But let's not just get stuck on aviation. Gerald, your story is very much about accommodation and it's about luxury hotels. Mm-hmm. Seems to me there's an obvious problem for you. The whole idea of luxury hotels reeks of excess. It reeks of people, indulging in material things that they frankly don't necessarily need. How can you square that entire concept upon which much of your business is built with this notion of reducing emissions and reducing impact on the planet?
Yes, and I think that we're also talking about responsible tourism, which is very much part of the environmental and the ecological process. But within the luxury side, and it's a fair point that you bring up, but actually we find that our guests are very conscious about what they're doing with their own impact on what's happening and how they live and everything. And just to give you an example, in hotels, and years ago I would have said, as a luxury hotel group like ours, you shouldn't, for example, suggest to guests that they mightn't want to change their sheets or they mightn't want to change their towels. And I stayed actually in the Carlton Tower, the Jumeirah Carlton Tower one year, and contrary to what I thought was our normal policy, we had a notice on the bed, which is quite a nice disc which went around. I'd change my towels but not my sheets, whatever the guest wanted on the day. And I said to the manager, well, why have you done this? He said, because the guests are asking for it. And actually the travellers are very, very conscious, and they have a conscience when it comes to travel. We like to say within our organisation, we like our guests to enjoy luxury without guilt. For us to be able... No, I see you, the way you're looking, but you're sceptical.
There is something so tokenistic about going into a hotel and having some polite little sign in the bathroom saying, sir or madam, if you would like to consider the environment and not put your towels out for cleaning every day, please feel free to do so.
What's tokenistic about it?
I'll tell you what's tokenistic about it, because in the same hotel, you've got a, excuse my language, bloody great golf course, you've got X number of swimming pools, all of which are sucking in resources and throwing out emissions in a way that goes far beyond changing or not changing your towels.
We have, with one of our resorts in Dubai, we cover 110 acres. We are looped in, connected to the Dubai grey water, recycled water system for all of our irrigation. We actually we use up to about 100 tons of food, of waste food, which we recycle, which we use for mulching, and which we use as well for irrigating our trees. Now, it's not 100% done like that, but a huge amount of our irrigation is on a grey water. No, that's not tokenism.
No, I wasn't about to use that word again. I was just going to say, don't worry, it's an interesting debate. Don't get defensive. Not yet. You can get defensive in 20 minutes.
Me defensive?
No, seriously though, I sometimes go to, not that often actually, unfortunately for Mrs. Sacker and the kids, but I sometimes go to very nice hotels and I'm blown away by the number of different swimming pools and, frankly, and it's a pet obsession, people will know if they've been here to World Responsible Tourism Day before with me, I'm also blown away why in water-scarce regions, and many of your hotels are in such regions, why there's this obsession with greenery. I mean, golf courses, but also incredibly extravagant swathes of grass and this and that, which seem to me completely unnecessary.
And if you're in the grey water recycle loop and you're using recycled water that otherwise would just go to waste anyway to actually irrigate your lawns, surely that is not a bad thing, because after all, living is bad for the planet. The human race is bad for the planet. We know that. But we do exist, and we do want to enjoy ourselves.
Well, that's the difference. We do exist, and we all want to...
We want to go back to the cave or something and live there?
No, but there's a difference between a 7-star Jumeirah hotel with helipad and all the accoutrements and living in a cave. I mean, somewhere between those two things, there is a world which might not involve some of the offer that you currently rely on to make your money.
Yes, and that's what I said. We have to create an environment in which our guests know that we have really a social conscience in relation to the environment and in relation to society. And this is a very important aspect. I give the example where... I will admit we haven't done it yet because we didn't sign the contract, but we had signed a contract and we still have a beach hotel coming up in Bali. The owner wanted us also to run a development further inland in Ubud on the island of Bali. We visited the site and it was in a very ecologically sensitive area, and the owner was extremely conscious himself of doing things correctly. We drove through a village on the way, just about 2 kilometers from the site, and we looked at that village and we said, wouldn't it be great that if we go ahead with this hotel, we go back into that village. We talk to the people in the villages, what can we do after 18 months to have your people employable in our hotel so that they can actually work in the hotel? And that we, Jumeirah, through our foundation, and we're still willing to do this once we get the right project, that we will provide a small health centre for immunisation, but also a training centre to teach people English, because it's a common language that the guests would use, or at least understand, and that we would also look at training them to be able to do jobs within the hotel. So they are employable in the hotel. And that we would also give them a shop in the hotel and teach them how to do handicrafts that would be applicable for the region. Well, so think of that just as an example. How good would that be for a guest who flies through London, probably and a few years ago would have to go through the demonstrators of Plain Stupid, very appropriately named, and then get on the aircraft, come out to a place like Bali. And this goes back to what I say about luxury without guilt. A guest will then know they're helping these people because they create employment. They're helping these people because they don't have to drift to the city, which causes probably a lot more pollution than it would by continuing to live in their own community. And overall, it has a very good benefit from the environmental point of view, but also from the society point of view. And this is something, I don't want to go on any longer.
Because, you know, I'll get to you in a sec, Martinez, but one last question for you right now, Joel. Are there projects which, since you've become involved with the group, you have looked at and thought, you know what, if we'd been truly responsible earlier, if we'd had a different vision of our relationship with you know, the planet, we would never have operated this hotel, we would never have gone ahead with this project. Are there any projects you've closed because you don't believe in your heart that you can adapt them, make the changes to make them responsible, to make them sustainable?
No, absolutely not, because we're totally convinced that we can always make them sustainable. One final little example, then I'll let Martinez talk, but one small example is that just behind our Jumeirah Beach Hotel, which is a big modern hotel, we have a maintenance yard and an air conditioning yard where everything is done for that. We discovered...
So where are we now?
We're in Dubai.
Okay.
We discovered, not through myself, but through our employees, that there's a school for severely handicapped children, which is a residential school, just behind that maintenance yard again. They took me over there to show what's happening. After that, we decided, well, we would adopt this school. So we now do their maintenance for their air conditioners. We try to help them with their buses. We help them with what they're doing. Our staff are very involved in it. Our management is involved. And the company is involved. And I think this is something that, again, where we can help within society as a hotel company.
All right, well, we'll come back because I want to talk about the wider picture in your industry and next steps and where you go next to make, you know, the commitments you're already talking about better, frankly.
Thank you.
But Martinez, it's time to get to the politician's perspective on all of this. I bet when you were Environment Minister, you looked at some of the travel and tourism sector in your own country and despaired of its failure to take on board perhaps some of the messages about emissions responsibility and sustainability. Is that true?
Well, all of us have to take our responsibility seriously, and certainly tourism is no different. It is indefensible that we can continue conducting ourselves in the way that we've done in the past. Politically indefensible, economically indefensible, but also morally indefensible.
But you sit in a government, which of course, like any government, is desperate for revenue, and in the end what you care about most is drawing in as many visitors as possible. Frankly, that surely trumps any desire to see the industry change its ways to become more sustainable and less emissions unfriendly.
Yes, and I think the point that both Johan and Gerald made quite legitimately is that we must find that balance where both the private sector and governments and responsible people out there feel satisfied with. And at the moment in governments, globally speaking, the progress is quite slow on this issue, and we are debating, you know, the meaning of what does common and differentiated mean? What is the exact meaning of respective capabilities? What are our historical responsibilities? But I believe that directs in line what both the other two panelists say. In terms of aviation, the kind of things that we should be discussing are the practical challenges, operational efficiencies, management of the shortest air traffic routes. Biofuels will be the big game changer. In terms of the rest of the hospitality industry, it's about green building design, recycling of water, waste management. And I think that is what we should properly discuss with our colleagues in the private sector.
One word you didn't use there was taxation. I mean, taxation can be used as a pretty blunt but powerful instrument to get business to change its behaviour. What about, you know, carbon taxes on the aviation industry, for example?
Yes, that's always the big debate between government and the private sector, the carrot or the stick, and certainly in some instances, carbon tax can have the required effect. But business will...
Well, don't talk theory, talk practice. Do you believe carbon taxes need to be imposed across the world on the aviation sector?
No, I think they are
so when
already...
you tell me, well, it could work, then you just say, no, I don't want to do it. Because many politicians shy away from the reality of telling their publics that, you know what, you're going to have to pay more for your airline ticket.
Yes, but I believe that one can achieve what you want to by market-based mechanisms, and that is what the debate is about at the moment.
The market is fake. You know, I said at the very beginning, the IPCC report shows us that, you know, we are, for all of our fine words, and God knows there've been a few of those over the years here, for all of our fine words, we're not actually getting to the root of the problem. Emissions keep rising, and with great respect, part of the problem is because emissions are rising so fast in the developing and emerging economies now.
But we'll also not get agreement on tax, in the same way that we won't get agreement
we won't if
on market-based...
people like you don't show leadership and come out bravely and say it is time for the world to engage with a form of carbon tax in the aviation sector.
No, but the problem is much deeper than that. The problem is the following. What, at the moment, in my view, is bedeviling the process is because the developed and the developing world cannot agree with who's responsible for what we have and who's going to take future responsibilities. In my view, it's quite simple. The carbon is a finite resource. We've used up 70% of it. The discussion and the fight really is about what do we do with the other 30%. And here the developed world say, you know, guys, let's all share the responsibility equally between ourselves. And we in the developing world say, well, it's not as easy as that. You know, look at who caused all of this. We must also grow and we must lift our populations out of poverty. So we actually need more of that 30%.
Well, I understand that, but that is it's a very understandable position, but it is, let us not forget, the position which led to the total failure of the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit and all of the summits and meetings thereafter to try and get a global agreement on greenhouse gas emissions cuts. You know, that's why we are where we are, in an international mess. So unless the developing countries such as your own are prepared at some point to bite the bullet and say they will sign up to a binding international agreement, which might include drawing the aviation sector into binding emissions targets in a form of carbon tax, then I don't see how we're ever going to move really very far forward.
But I don't think the developing world's countries are the problem. I think the problem is, in my view, major developed countries like the US. We are quite willing to sign up to a binding agreement. The question is, what will that binding agreement say? And there is no way that developing countries can ever expect to sign up to a global binding agreement where we can say to a country like the US, you continue to emit at the level of individuals 10 times per capita what we emit in developing countries.
But in aviation particularly, I know there's been a recent agreement, I forget what the body's called, but one of the international aviation sector governing bodies came out with a commitment to trying to establish a ceiling on emissions from the aviation industry. And I think they were saying that after 2020, there should be no more rise in emissions from the aviation sector based, I think, on what it was in 2005 or something.
Yes.
Essentially putting a lid on aviation emissions. But developing countries, including China, India, I don't quite know what your position is in South Africa, but many of these countries said, no way, we're not interested, even on a voluntary basis, of signing that commitment.
No. I understand it quite differently. IATA said, on behalf of airlines in developing countries, they said carbon neutral growth after 2020, or a cap on emissions, and by 2050, 50% reduction in emissions compared to 2005 emissions. All airlines. But what the problem is here is how do we still marry the clash in the treaty principles of common but differentiated and equal treatment for everybody? That is what the discussion between us is all about.
Right, so as far as you're concerned, that fundamental problem has not gone away at all.
No, I think the recent ICAO assembly showed it is still very much...
All right. Well, in that case then, you know, the politics of this isn't, frankly, moving very fast, not as fast as any of us would really like it to be. So it comes back to what individual businesses, but more particularly worldwide sectors, are prepared to do for themselves. You've just been listening, Johan, to me grilling South Africa's minister on this issue. You say TUI is doing more than enough to show that it's taken its responsibilities seriously. But do you think the industry as a whole is, the aviation sector that you work in?
Well, let me, I mean, we can always do more. every company in any industry, regardless on how many awards you get for, how fuel efficient you are and how climate friendly you are.
Sure. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. What more could you do? What have you considered doing that you know would actually reduce your emissions further, but you haven't done?
Well, a couple of things. Let's come back on this legislation. One of the things that we have been calling for a long time that I know is going to make a big change if we can make that happen, and that is by looking at a common framework for reporting carbon emission within airlines.
See, I'm amazed that there isn't one already.
No, I'm amazed as well. I mean, you're buying a car, you see every car ad, you look at, exactly what the emission is on that as well. And there are standards. We are working on it with passenger per revenue kilometer that everybody knows that it's out there as well, and it's a very easy way to do as well. If we could get that into consumers' mindset, so they very easily could make a deliberate choice on who do they want to fly with, who do they want to travel with, because we're talking about a sector who is quite commoditized. There isn't a lot of things that differ between some of the airlines that is out there. Clearly, apart from ourselves, it's very differentiated. But there is this, if we could put this in front of the consumers, we know the consumers will make deliberate choices and choose certain companies before other companies.
But you're saying there's no standardized measurement or metric, so that a traveller can look at the airline's efficiency record.
Absolutely.
Not at all. So why aren't people like you making it happen?
Well, I mean, we've been trying to persuade, governments and people in Brussels on this for a long time, that there should be a framework where we should do this. Now, the problem is, we say, well, why don't you just do that? But how are they going to relate to that? It's got to be something where you're actually going to say, when you're putting up, like we have 73 grams per passenger revenue kilometer, in relation to what? Well, we know that is 20% better than, the budget carriers of Europe. It's 1/3 better than the scheduled carriers in Europe as well. So I can understand why some companies doesn't want to do that. But I tell you, if you want to make a change, you make the consumers put pressure on companies to make a change. We all pride ourselves on being driven by customers. We all pride ourselves on giving the customers what they want and what they need. And the moment they start making deliberate choices on who they're going to travel with, you're going to see some more action on this.
Right.
On the taxation, I mean, I think that, we're going to need an international taxation on this. I think we're going to need an international taxation.
And that will, in its simplest, crudest form, mean the customer will have to pay a little bit more. Will have to pay a premium because that will be the carbon price.
Yeah, yes, but you take an example, the most famous example here in the UK, you take the APD, Air Passenger Duty, which was launched as something that was going to be there to make companies and incentivize them to be more climate friendly. We paid in the UK last year £120 million on this tax. 120 million tax on it. And I think that the government's also now said that, look, we're not pretending even that this has something to do with the environment anymore. But what I'm thinking about is that if we can get a taxation scheme that provides a level playing field for everybody in this industry, where the funds, and think about our 120 million, if that can be replaced by actually going into research and development, going into projects that would develop the biofuels, the hybrid technology as well, I think that will make a big difference if you take that in conjunction with also some consumer pressure. We all understand, the economical situation in the world today, where governments are, scraping to reduce their public spending, trying to get everything they can in terms of the revenue as well. But, this issue has come in the shadow now for some time because of the recession.
I don't hear many other aviation leaders saying what you're saying, and that you acknowledge the need for a carefully crafted tax. Do you think there is a failure of leadership in your industry?
Well, I think, clearly, because we don't have it. Clearly, we don't have agreement on these things. So, there is...
Well, I thought you meant we don't have leadership. Do you think maybe you don't have much leadership in your industry?
Well, let me just say that I think that, there is a necessity to look into these things as well. But I'm thinking also that this should replace the current national taxes that were supposed to do something in this area, but it's not. Because the truth of the matter is that a number of governments have actually taken this revenue and they don't put it into what it's supposed to be anymore. So there's also got to be a responsibility to the governments and to the lawmakers to actually put this item back to the agenda.
Now, okay, Gerald, you're smiling.
Have you ever seen a government who actually spends the tax that it earns on the actual issue and the purpose for which it was originally raised? They never do.
Why are you looking at me? I'm not in government.
No,
He's
but
in
I'm
government.
asking you. I mean, you're saying, oh, tax them. And with all respect to you, Johan, I don't agree. And I don't think there will be a fair taxation. I think it's absolutely impossible. And you made a point earlier, which is quite right. Airlines will continue to improve their efficiency as far as fuel consumption is concerned, because fuel is a diminishing resource. It will continue to get more expensive. And it will be in your commercial interest to continue to reduce the cost of fuel. And you will do that through better means. And eventually, oil companies will put more into biofuels because it's in their interest to do so, because there will be world demand. And your example of Heathrow passengers have actually increased, which the government might say, well, there you see,
Yeah, they might.
why are
They
you
probably
raising
would.
tax, though? Are you raising tax for the purposes Johan says, for better research and development in relation to better environmental practices? Or are you just raising tax to try to prevent or discourage people from travelling? Because that's not what we're about. We actually openly want to encourage people to travel, because we believe that travel and tourism is quite a force for good. And
Well,
can
never
do a lot
mind
of
all
good.
that. You
It's not
more
all that.
specifically believe that without people travelling, in particular to your hotels, your bottom line fails and your business collapses.
I told you the other day, 260 million jobs worldwide are provided by the travel and tourism industry. That is almost 10% of the global workforce. And a lot of these people are young, entry-level people who need jobs and go into jobs. And don't tell me that having jobs is bad for the environment.
No, well, as a father of 3 young people who need jobs, I understand that. But it seems to me, and you may not like this, but it seems to me at least the aviation sector has to face these questions every day, because, frankly, I suppose more than anything else, the aviation industry clearly has no option but to use fossil fuel for its energy supply, for its jets. You guys skulk around not facing the same pressure as the aviation industry, because nobody quite thinks of the hotel and accommodation sector as being so central to the debate about greenhouse gas emissions. But you are central to the debate. And I wonder, now not talking about what you do, but what you might do in the future. Where are you going to take your business to improve your record? Not just you at Jumeirah, but the industry, your part of the industry as a whole.
Absolutely. But just to put it in context, and I promise you I'll address your question, you said at the beginning that the industry accounts for about 5% of
Yeah, but that
carbon
figure's
emissions.
growing. And it will grow substantially.
Well, we'll see, because unfortunately, as you say, the rest of the figure is growing as well. The whole thing is growing, so we still might remain at 5%, though absolute numbers will probably go up. And the aviation industry, in fairness to them, is only 2%. So I think it just needs to be put in context. But to address your question, we're working at the moment with what's called the International Tourism Partnership. It's ITP, which is a number of industry people, but particularly hotels. And all the large hotel companies are members. And in this, working with the World Travel and Tourism Council to come up, as Johan was saying, we need measurement, and we know that.
And what sort of measurement do you offer at the moment?
We are... No, you said, what are we going to do?
Yeah,
So,
I know,
right,
let's
okay,
begin.
right.
We'll do this in stages. How about that?
Well,
what do you do now, and how is it going to get much, much better?
Okay, well, I'll work to the future and come back, right? So
No, I'd rather hear about now first, because I think now might be quite interesting and a bit depressing. What, right now, in terms of metrics, measurements, information, do you provide?
I've started to tell you that we are working with the bodies I mentioned to come up again with a common...
You're working for the future. What do you provide right now? Is it? I mean, if there's nothing, just say nothing.
Well, okay, nothing. What I'm doing right now, and what we're all doing right now, is taking the issue very seriously, trying to work out a way where we can have a measurement that is pretty common throughout hotels, in terms of saying to, say, a traveller...
But just to be clear, because there isn't anything right now at all.
Well, there are a lot of initiatives, as we were talking about.
I can feel your initiatives and your work and everything else for the future. But it's not like this debate. I've been at this event for the last half dozen years, and I think I've had this sort of conversation with people in the hotels industry before. It's a bit stunning that still there's absolutely nothing. Right now, today, there is no standardized measurement across your sector that will allow people some information about just how efficient or inefficient you are.
But that doesn't mean that people are doing nothing, or that companies are doing nothing. Of course they are. We are, for example, here, cooking oil. We recycle 48 tons of cooking oil in a year. Do you know what we do with that? we give it to the recycling plant, for example, in Dubai, and they use that to power their machines to do further recycling. We recycle plastic, we recycle all of these. We have many, many initiatives. Measurement, I agree with you, needs to be a lot more agreed, but it takes time to come up with a realistic measurement system.
So when will it be ready? I mean, all these initiatives and working groups and da-da-da-da-da.
I would say within the next 3 years we would be able to...
3 years?
You asked me a question, I'm trying to answer it. I would say within the next 3 years, we would be able to tell you, as a customer staying in our luxury hotels, exactly what your carbon footprint is and what we do about it to try to reduce it. I have seen hotels, and we're looking to introduce it as well, where they actually publish their targets for the reduction, for their carbon footprint for the year, and what they can do to reduce that further, and what their targets are for the future. And that is what, in hotels, we are trying to do, and we are committed to doing it.
Okay. I should say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop yakking myself in a moment and get some questions from the floor. So just one thing, a degree of scepticism, particularly from Gerald, not quite so much from Johan, about whether politicians, however they try and impose controls and taxes and direct the private sector in travel and tourism to do more when it comes to the whole sort of climate change agenda, their scepticism that government in the end doesn't really follow through and frankly imposes taxes which it then spends on other things rather than trying to feed back into improving the situation in their areas. So how do you plead? They are sceptical of you. Are you sceptical of them?
Well, some of the criticism, I believe it's quite valid. I must just say, Johan, I would love to take you back with me to South Africa. You're the first businessman that I've ever come across who are advocating taxes. So you're a great example to some of my colleagues back at home, you know.
Can I just say, it seems like, everybody, when I said this here, they missed the point that I want to replace the current national taxes with an international
with a global
tax.
tax.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, not exciting.
We want to abolish the tax completely.
But I think we need the point on common metrics. It's absolutely valid. That's what we need. At the moment, if we look at the hospitality industry, we see a lot of fragmentation, different labels. So what we need to do, and I think the UNWTO is a key organization in that regard, is to get a global standard. And we must settle the debate between certification and monitoring and reporting. That's what we should do. And it's a crucial first step for us. And government and the private sector should do that together.
But is it not amazing that we're still saying that's what should happen when, frankly, we could have had this debate 6, 7, 8 years ago and people then would have been saying it should happen and it still hasn't happened?
Well, I agree. And I think multilateral organizations like the UNWTO are absolutely key. And they are gearing themselves to do exactly that. And I think it's doable. In South Africa, we've announced 3-4 years ago the first ever responsible tourism framework in the world. Brazil followed us shortly afterwards. So I think all of us are trying to do it in our own little corners, and you have all these private sector initiatives, and they are great, they're commendable, but they're not enough.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the frankness of all three of you. It's been fascinating for me to hear you. I just wonder if there are some questions from the floor. Good, there are. So we've got one at the front, one at the back. There's a microphone already at the back, is there? So go at the back, and then we'll come to the front.
Hi there. Oh, sorry, that's very loud. Fran Hughes from the International Tourism Partnership. Just like to clarify that we have worked out a common measure for reporting on the carbon footprints of a hotel stay or meeting. So that metric is available now, and we have over 16,000 member properties already using this. Our members of the working group, which include Jumeirah, are in the process of rolling out the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative to their properties.
Right.
Just to clarify, there is a metric.
And that, sorry, under whose authority is that metric established? I mean, who's...
That was developed by the International Tourism Partnership, the World Travel and Tourism Council, in partnership with 23 global hotel companies.
Right, and so you're rolling this out, are you?
Yes, well, there's still a few tweaks to be done, like laundry, for example.
You don't sound quite as confident as the lady over there.
No, I am. No, we're totally committed to it, and absolutely, yes. We are members of it, as you rightly said. No, we are. So when I was grilling you, why didn't you say, Stephen, get with the programme, it's already happening? I did mention that we were doing it with the ITP and the WTTC, which is exactly what the lady said. It still hasn't rolled out to our hotels anyway.
Why? Why hasn't it?
Ask her.
Well, she's not on the panel. You're on the panel. I mean, and anyway, let me remind myself of your very important job. I mean, you're the president and group CEO. I don't need to ask her why you haven't rolled it out. I'm asking you.
No, because there's still one specific issue that I have been informed is still standing out, is how we measure hotels that outsource their laundry to a laundry supplier versus some hotel companies such as our own in Dubai, where we actually have our own laundry. Because in many of the hotels where they outsource, we want to know that that has actually been measured as part of the carbon footprint, because laundry is a huge area of carbon footprint, as we talked about before.
So you're telling me that a very important metric, which you've said is fundamental to moving the industry to a better place, you're currently refusing to roll it out because of your fear that in-house laundries are being unfairly penalised. Is that?
We're not refusing to roll it out. We're waiting as any, we have to have, as we said, a measurable system, a system that works for everybody, and a system that's fair across the board. So we just want to understand how that can be addressed.
So you're not refusing to roll it out, but you're not actually rolling it out because you're worried about laundries?
Well, you don't trivialise it.
I'm not trivialising it. I'm just trying to...
Laundries are an extremely important part of the overall carbon footprint. They are. If we work in the business, we know what it is, how many tons of laundry we do every day, despite the fact that you don't believe our little notices that we put in
the very fact that it's hundreds of tons a day shows that the little sign saying don't chuck everything in the laundry.
We'll give you paper towels the next time. Recyclable.
All right, well, thanks for the question, a very good one. You, sir, at the front.
Thank you very much. Trondheim Council Chair of Sustainable Aviation. Just want to make a couple of points about what the industry is doing. Sustainable Aviation is a consortium of airlines, manufacturers, airports here in the UK, and NATS, to try and improve the environmental performance of the industry. We support global carbon pricing. We think that is the right way to address our carbon emissions, but it has to be through a global deal to avoid a competitive distortion and create that level playing field. And your question about leadership, I think there is industry leadership through IATA, our trade association. We have committed goals. You mentioned carbon neutral growth 2020, but also a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. I think we're pretty unique in terms of there's no other global industry that has those committed goals.
But hang on, they are non-binding, aren't they? I mean, the whole thing is voluntary.
Well, the industry it relies on governments to make regulation. I think that's the other piece, that IATA has worked very closely with ICAO to develop a global deal. And I think the General Assembly in September demonstrated that there has been some progress. A lot more work needs to be done. So here's my question. The issue has been common but differentiated responsibilities, both at the UN level and at ICAO. The question really is, do we think that CBDR applies at the airline level? Airlines, there's a lot less difference between airlines than there are countries. We fly largely the same aircraft, we pay the same amount for our fuel, we have the same operating procedures. So it seems that CBDR applies less at an airline level, and therefore it shouldn't be a hurdle to a global deal. So I'd be interested in answers to that.
Martinez, you?
I think...
Can I just say, I'm not even going to pretend that I know all the acronyms. When you said CBDR...
Common but differentiated.
I see.
Differentiated responsibilities. So it's the Kyoto Protocol issue around...
Yeah, no, I get you now. Okay, go on, yeah.
Well, the problem with that concept is the following. When developed countries use it, they really accentuate the common part of it. When developing countries want to use that concept, we actually use the differentiated part of it. That's the problem. But you're absolutely right. We need, in my view, an enhanced understanding of what we mean. Otherwise, we will never, ever get to an agreement. But there's another issue, the elephant in the room. It's the European Union's, European Union's ETS, the aviation part of it. Because that sent the signal to all of us all over the world that there's an aggressive unilateralism in the area of aviation. And for the EU to tell all of us in the world, listen, we're going to tax you, your planes, your passengers in your airspace, we'll tax you. In my view, that did much more damage to the process of negotiating a global framework than did the issue of CBDR.
Did you want to say on that, Johan? Or? you feel you've said enough already?
Yeah.
On the tax issue?
I think it's. I mean, it's one thing, and I recognize that there is a lot of things been happening and a lot of leadership been taking place. But there is something also we should be careful about when we're, giving these numbers to reduce, the emissions by 50% in 2050. I mean, my experience and the experience we have in the company is that unless you set targets close to now, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do next year?
Yeah.
What are you going to do year 3, year 4, year 5? How do you incentivize people in your organization? How do you penalize bad behavior? And make it happen now as we speak. In 2050, we got to get onto this now.
I think that's a good point, if I may say so.
If we did this in a business, if we had a business where I said, actually, in 2050, I'm going to make X amount of millions, but until then, I'm not really quite sure what's going to happen. It wouldn't work,
There are a few businesses that seem to operate that way. But, right, we've probably got time for one more. Oh, God, there's so many hands up. Let me go over this side, because I haven't been over this side. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Frye. I'm a hotelier by trade and a consultant for sustainability. I have a question for Tullman. You talk about your amazing KPIs. I'd like to know what KPIs you have got for your contracting operations that go to destinations and hotels, squeezing the prices to unsustainable levels, and as such also increasing travel frequencies.
Well, the KPIs are energies, savings in energy. We are looking at waste management, and we're also looking at the human rights side of things. All part of the code of conduct that we have with suppliers. Everybody has to work on that one. What was the second part of the question that we were increasing?
You should be paying hoteliers more for your bedrooms.
It's funny you heard that bit, Gerald.
Yeah, exactly. I heard about it as well.
Your ears suddenly pricked up. Yeah.
No, I think on the contrast, we are, look, we are a business who carries, within my sector, 20 million customers. And our business is built upon scale, and in order to do that, we need to make sure that we have very competitive rates out there. Our model is very much built on taking and having influence over hotels. It's not rare that we go to a hotelier and we say, well, look, we would like to work with you for a period of 3 years to 5 years, and we're willing to pay you this and take commitments on this. We get a price on that. That is a substantial reduction that if you're going to walk out from the street to buy that, and we share some of that back into the customer, and that's how we develop the growth.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. This is going to have to be the absolute last one because I'm a really awful timekeeper, and there's a gentleman with a very, very determined look in his eye, and he's got his hand up. You can have the last question, sir, but make it brief. Sorry?
Can you hear me? Stephen, thank you.
Yeah.
The panel, thank you. My question relates to the consumer perception of greenwashing, specifically by hotels. In the safari industry, there's a growing sector that are demanding evidence of what you are doing, but they're not receiving it. And when they do receive it, they're very sceptical that what you're saying isn't actually happening. How do you prove to them, and how do you engage that growing sector to improve your own standards and reassure them what you're doing is making a difference?
Right.
Thank you.
So, yeah, you've got to prove it's not just words, not just greenwash, and how do you do that?
Well, I think we'll be judged by what we do, absolutely, and I agree with the member of the audience who asked the question, and I think it's very important that we communicate properly with our guests, we show what we are doing, and that it's not just, as you say, greenwashing.
But it needs some sort of independent audit, doesn't it, or else it
yes,
won't...
but that's what we're trying to do with the ITP, the WTTC, and everything that we're trying to put together. We are working on that, and you're absolutely right. It has to happen, and we have to have clearly measurable results for our guests so they can see what we are doing. Even when you talk about building buildings in the first place, do we do it to LEED standard, and if LEED standard, to which of the LEED standards do we do it in terms? And that's really important, because at the capital level, when you're actually building a hotel, you can really put in for 20, 30 years, good practices that will ensure that we use up less of the environment. And I do agree that I think it was Radisson Hotels who were actually giving loyalty points rewards for the guests who decided that they didn't want their sheets changed, for example. So there needs to be something very measurable for the guests to be able to see that they're being rewarded for good practice.
Right.
And one example we did in one of the hotels on that was actually that we said that if you don't change the sheets and the towels within 5 days, you will get a credit in the bars and the restaurants.
Right.
Tremendously, everybody.
I bet that went down very well. Yeah, I'm pleased we've ended on a very specific question, which was all about, you know, not just talking the talk, but you know the rest of it, actually doing the stuff, backing your words with actions. You know, Simon said at the very beginning, ladies and gentlemen, this is important, but it's not easy. And I think we've seen in this discussion that, and some of the slightly impolite questions I've asked, that, you know, when you dig down into this, there's some very tough questions. And it's not easy for you guys to deliver. But I tell you what, I really appreciate you all coming up into this panel, having such an interesting and such a frank discussion with me. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank my panelists very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.